Gaming history is filled with hidden gems, titles that pushed boundaries, took risks, and delivered experiences the world just wasn't ready for. These games were innovative, bold, and ahead of their time, but somehow got lost in the shuffle and faded into obscurity. Whether it was bad timing, poor marketing, or just bad luck, these action games deserved so much better. Today, we're bringing them back into the spotlight. These are the 20 forgotten action games that were ahead of their time. Let's go. This is the one on this list that almost no one has heard of, and it might be the most impressive pure design achievement of the whole group. Severed Steel is a first-person shooter built around one-armed acrobatic combat with fully destructible environments. You're vaulting off walls, sliding across floors, diving through the air in slow motion, and every single surface around you can be blown apart. The destructibility isn't a gimmick. It changes how every fight plays out, because cover disappears, new angles open up, and the geometry of the battlefield shifts constantly. The one-armed mechanic is more than aesthetic too, because it forces you to rely on movement and momentum rather than just aiming and shooting. Small studio, tiny budget, almost zero marketing. It came out, got a handful of glowing reviews from people who found it, and disappeared. If this game had come from a major studio with proper visibility, we'd be talking about it the way we talk about Superhot. Ninja Theory made Hellblade, one of the most emotionally brutal and respected games in recent memory. And then they went and made Bleeding Edge, a colorful, melee-focused team brawler that felt like the complete opposite in tone. And it was actually a lot of fun. The combat was built almost entirely around close-range fighting, positioning, and team coordination, which set it apart from every other hero game on the market that was primarily about shooting. The characters were wild and inventive, the movement felt smooth, and the ability combinations were genuinely creative. But it launched into Xbox Game Pass without a clear identity, died within a few months, and got quietly abandoned. The tragedy is that a melee-first team brawler is exactly the kind of game that a dedicated community would have sustained for years. There just wasn't enough time or support for that community to form. The foundation was there. The commitment wasn't. Volition, the studio behind Saints Row, tried something genuinely original here. A single-player open-world game where you control a team of 3 agents, each with completely different playstyles, and you swap between them on the fly mid-mission. The character roster was huge, the designs were colorful and distinct, and the combat was built around finding the right team combination for the right situation. It was trying to bring the feel of a team-based hero game into a solo experience, which nobody had really attempted in an open-world setting before. The problem is that it launched in the shadow of Saints Row's legacy and couldn't quite figure out its own identity. It was too weird for people who wanted Saints Row 5 and too unfamiliar for people who might have appreciated it on its own terms. The concept of dynamically switching between characters in a single-player open world is something games are still experimenting with today. Housemarque is a Finnish studio that spent years making the best arcade games nobody was buying, and Next Machina was their masterpiece in that era, before Returnal finally made them famous. It's a twin-stick shooter that runs at an insane pace. Enemies everywhere, bullets everywhere, voxel explosions turning every screen into chaos. But underneath the madness is an incredibly precise design. Every enemy type, every movement pattern, every screen layout is constructed with arcade-perfect intentionality. Eugene Jarvis, who made Robotron 2084 back in 1982, was directly involved in the design. This was a direct conversation between the origins of arcade gaming and what it could look like in 2017. The tragedy is that the audience for premium arcade games had essentially collapsed. Housemarque made brilliant game after brilliant game and kept nearly going broke. Next Machina got the reviews it deserved, but not the sales. Then Returnal happened, and suddenly everyone wanted to know what Housemarque had done before. Flying Wild Hog took something genuinely weird and made it work. Shadow Warrior 2 is a loot-driven first-person slasher. You're cutting demons apart with katanas and firearms, while stats, weapon drops, and upgrade trees are all running underneath the auction like a Diablo system. That combination sounds like it shouldn't work at all. First-person melee combat is notoriously hard to get right, and adding loot mechanics on top of it could easily become a mess. But somehow it flows. The movement is quick, the sword combat has actual weight and rhythm to it, and the comedy, stupid, juvenile, self-aware, keeps the whole thing from taking itself too seriously. It also had 4-player co-op, which made the chaos even better. The problem was positioning. It wasn't quite serious enough for the hardcore crowd, and not mainstream enough to pull in casual players. It fell into a gap and disappeared, taking a genuinely original design with it. Before boss rush was a recognized genre that studios were deliberately building games around, the game makers made Fury, and it was one of the most intense, demanding, and rewarding action experiences of the decade. There are no regular enemies, no levels to grind through, just you and a sequence of bosses, each one a massive, escalating fight that tests every reflex and pattern rating skill you have. The visual style is wild. Character designs by Takashi Okazaki, the guy who created Afro Samurai, and the electronic soundtrack is so good that people still listen to it years later, completely independent of the game. Each boss fight in Fury feels like its own complete story. The pacing, the learning curve, the moment when everything clicks and you finally beat a boss that's been destroying you, it's one of the purest feelings in gaming. It pointed toward an entire genre that would explode later, and it did it with almost no budget and no mainstream attention. September 1st, 2015, Avalanche Studios releases Mad Max. Also on September 1st, 2015, Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. That's not bad timing, that's a funeral. Mad Max had no chance at the cultural conversation, and as a result, almost nobody discovered what was genuinely one of the most satisfying open-world gameplay loops of that generation. The whole game is built around methodically dismantling enemy strongholds across a huge desert wasteland. You strip their defenses, cut their supply lines, take out their commanders, and watch their influence shrink on the map in real time. The car combat was visceral and weighty, and the atmosphere, this crumbling post-apocalyptic Australia baking under an orange sky, was stunning. The game had patience built into its design in a way that open-world games rarely do. It rewarded you for being thorough rather than rushing through. It deserved a real audience, and never got one because of one catastrophically bad release date. People remember Battleborn as the game that lost to Overwatch, and that framing is both accurate and deeply unfair. Yes, Gearbox's hero shooter launched around the same time as Overwatch in 2016 and got completely steamrolled. But Battleborn was doing something genuinely more ambitious. It had a full co-op story campaign with missions, character progression, lore, and narrative on top of its competitive multiplayer modes. It was trying to be both a live service hero game and a traditional co-op shooter at the same time. Overwatch was cleaner, more accessible, and had Blizzard's marketing machine behind it, so there was never really a contest. But if you go back and look at what Battleborn was actually attempting, the ambition is obvious. A hero shooter with a real story campaign is something people are still asking for today. Battleborn just tried to deliver it before the market was structured to support it. ReCore had one of the most interesting concepts in a long time. You're a girl named Jewel in a desert wasteland, and your companions are robots, whose core essences you can swap between different mechanical bodies, depending on what the situation needs. Combat, traversal, puzzle solving, all wrapped around this relationship between a human and her robot crew. The ideas were genuinely charming and creative, but Microsoft and Armature Studio released it in a clearly unfinished state. Load times were measured in minutes, literal minutes. Content that was advertised was missing, and the final dungeon was locked behind a grind that felt broken. The reviews reflected that reality. A definitive edition came out a year later that fixed most of the problems and added the missing content, but the damage was already done. Nobody came back to check. It's one of the clearest examples of a promising game that got killed not by bad ideas, but by bad launch. Arcane Studios put out one of the deepest action games ever made and watched it get ignored because people saw the name Prey and expected a sequel to the 2006 shooter. This game has nothing to do with that. You wake up on a space station called Talos 1, and almost immediately everything goes wrong. Alien organisms called the Typhon have taken over, and the way you deal with them is entirely up to you. You can fight, you can sneak, you can hack systems, you can use a device that lets you transform into literally any object in the environment. The level design is so interconnected that areas you explored early in the game become completely different experiences once you have new abilities. It's the kind of game where two people can compare playthroughs and realize they had almost completely different experiences. That level of reactive design was rare in 2017, and it's still rare now. The Order got absolutely destroyed by critics and reviewers for being too short. 6 to 8 hours, they said, for a $60 game. And honestly, that criticism wasn't wrong. But in the process of burying it for the length, everyone completely ignored what Ready at Dawn actually built here. The setting, Victorian London, secret knightly order, werewolves mixed with industrial age technology, was one of the most original action game worlds ever created. The visual fidelity was so far beyond what PlayStation 4 was producing at the time that people genuinely thought screenshots were pre-rendered. The gunplay, the atmosphere, the sheer artistic commitment to a specific period and tone, it was all extraordinary. If The Order had been 10 hours longer, we'd probably be talking about a franchise right now. Instead, it became a punchline, which is a shame because the bones of something genuinely special were sitting right there. Cliff Bleszinski made Gears of War. The man had credibility, so when he announced Lawbreakers, a hero shooter built around zero-gravity combat zones, people were at least curious. And the game itself, it was genuinely good. The anti-gravity sections completely changed how fights played out. You're floating, spinning, repositioning in 3 dimensions, while ability combinations from different roles are colliding around you. It felt fresh in a way most shooters don't. The problem was the market. Overwatch had already taken over, and nobody was willing to learn a new shooter ecosystem when they were already invested somewhere else. Boss Key Productions shut down within a year of launch. But here's the thing. The zero-gravity combat design that Lawbreakers was built around is still something no shooter has really revisited, which tells you it was ahead of what the audience was ready for, not behind it. This one genuinely might be the most creative game mechanic of the entire decade, and almost nobody talked about it. Echo is set inside this massive ancient palace, and the palace itself is alive. It's watching everything you do, studying your behavior, and using that information to program the enemies that hunt you. If you start sprinting everywhere, the enemies learn to sprint. If you figure out that shooting is effective, now the enemies shoot back. If you hide and stealth your way through a section, congratulations, you just taught every enemy in the game to stealth hunt you. The only way to reset their behavior is to trigger a blackout cycle in the palace, where the lights go off and nothing can learn, but you also can't do anything useful during that time. It turned every single gameplay decision into a consequence. No game before or since has made you feel like the environment itself was paying attention to you the way Echo did. Remedy Entertainment has always been a studio that swings for something nobody else is attempting, and Quantum Break was probably their biggest swing ever. The idea was simple but insane. You play through an episode of the game, then you watch an actual live-action TV episode that changes based on choices you made. Then you play again. The time manipulation combat was genuinely satisfying too. You could freeze enemies mid-bullet, create time bubbles, and rush through stuttering reality like the world was buffering. But here's what killed it. People in 2016 weren't ready to sit and watch 25 minutes of TV inside a video game. The pacing felt weird to reviewers, and the mixed scores scared off a huge chunk of potential buyers. Looking back now in an era where everyone is chasing cinematic storytelling in games, Quantum Break was already doing it, just a few years too early for the audience to appreciate it. Okay, so here's one of the biggest crimes in gaming history. Titanfall 2 came out in October 2016, right between Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. EA literally scheduled it to die, and because of that, millions of people never got to experience what might be the single best movement system ever built into a first-person shooter. We're talking wall running, grappling hooks, sliding, chaining momentum across entire maps. It felt like playing as a superhero without ever telling you that you were. The campaign had a level called Effect and Cause, where you're literally flipping between two timelines mid-fight, and game designers were losing their minds over it. Years later, Respawn used that same DNA to build Apex Legends, which became a billion-dollar franchise. So the idea survived, but Titanfall 2 itself never got its moment. If you look up underrated in gaming, this is the example everybody uses, and they're right.